Don't just think of your job as picking winners out of these random experiments. Think of your job as generating knowledge. I want to know not which one is best. I want to know why it's best. And so that's the difference, I think. And I'm not sure that the AI or the ML approaches will tell us why, unless you think about the experiment and design it in a rational method. I want that knowledge. That's what I want. So I'm not satisfied. We saw it happen with automation. Really, it happens a lot. It's probably a dominant way for people who have those automated tools. They start getting lazy. That's a good way of saying it. So they're not as scientific as much as just get that answer and get it quick, right?
Welcome back to the Smart Biotech Scientists. I'm your host, David Brühlmann, and this is part 2 of our eye-opening conversation with Tom Fletcher, who is an R&D Director at Fujifilm Irvine Scientific. In part 1, we explored the evolution of cell culture media development and the integration of AI into bioprocessing. Now we'll tackle the practical aspects of implementing these technologies, how to avoid the pitfalls of black box algorithms, create resilient supply chains, and leverage the full potential of these powerful new technologies. Tom will also share the wisdom he would give to his 30-year younger self. Insights you won't want to miss if you're navigating the complex world of biologics manufacturing. So let's jump right back into our conversation with Tom Fletcher on balancing innovation with expertise in bioprocess development. Are you juggling the complexities of CMC development while trying to enjoy the beauty of biotech? Have you ever wondered if there's a way to simplify bioprocessing? Welcome to the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast, where we're diving headfirst into the very challenges you face. We're breaking it down, demystifying the jargon, and giving you the keys to unlock your full potential. I'm your host, David Brühlmann, and I get it. With 15 plus years in the biotech industry, I face the same challenges you do. There's a way to simplify and streamline so you can remove complexity, you can skip trials and errors, deliver without delay your groundbreaking therapy to clinics and market, and still enjoy every single step. Do you want to learn how industry experts and I did it? Grab a cup of coffee and your favorite notebook and pen. Now is the time to take your bioprocessing game to the next level. Let's smarten up biotech. As we have so many powerful AI tools at our disposal, I would love to talk about risks, because obviously if you talk to a lot of different people, some are very excited, others are not so excited or say, well, let's wait and see. What are the main risks associated with over-reliance on AI to solve bioprocessing challenges?
Well, I guess if somebody doesn't understand the limitations, that presents a risk all by itself, because they might expect too much they might over-depend on it, which is the same as saying expect too much from it. And I like to draw a parallel, because we've actually watched this happen previously over the years, and that is, as automation became available, we use high-throughput methods, for example, everything from cell line development to media screening and things like that. I noticed right away a laziness that developed among scientists. So instead of thinking about why or designing an experiment carefully and thoughtfully and thinking about what we were testing, people would be able to just screen lots and lots of things. And that would be what I call a random method. And guess what? It's hard to argue with that, because it's very successful, but it's missing one of the most important things that I really like to champion, and that is, don't just think of your job as picking winners out of these random experiments. Think of your job as generating knowledge. I want to know not which one is best. I want to know why it's best. And so that's the difference, I think. And I'm not sure that the AI or the ML approaches will tell us why, unless you think about the experiment and design it in a rational method. I want that knowledge. That's what I want. So I'm not satisfied. We saw it happen with automation. Really, it happens a lot. It's probably a dominant way for people who have those automated tools. They start getting lazy. That's a good way of saying it. So they're not as scientific as much as just get that answer and get it quick, right?
Yeah, smart biotech scientists, I want to say it again. It's about gaining knowledge of your process and your product. That's important. And I think it becomes even more important today where you can screen or quote screen hundreds of possibilities using AI and create these scenarios. Also, in all that maze, finally, you need to know actually, what am I learning about my process?
And it's not just satisfying to the scientist, which it is, but I think it prepares you for the future because you're probably going to need to know that at some point, whether it's answering a regulatory agency or it's troubleshooting when something surprising happens. So that knowledge is extremely valuable. It's easy to underestimate the value of that knowledge when you're in a big hurry and you just need to get an answer quickly, right?
And how can we mitigate that risk? Because definitely the risk is there that we rely way too much on these technologies, but how can we go about that?
Well, I don't have any magic answer to that, but I think it's a matter of helping people understand their job is to generate knowledge. And then we might create rules. Before you do any experiment, I want you to write down the questions that you plan to answer with this experiment, or at least tell me what your hypothesis is. Think about if this result happens, what will we do if that result, just putting some thought. And I think it's up to let's call them the managers of this development activity to challenge the scientists to think about their experiments, not just go do lots of experiments, turn the crank. But so I think the leadership should be challenging their scientists to be thoughtful in everything they do.
Using AI, I've done some testing with various ChatGPT, with Claude, just to see what is actually the output when you put pretty much the same input, the same prompt. And sometimes it's surprising what different outputs you get. And it's really hard to understand why. In one case, I precisely said, do this and not that. And the AI still did the thing I didn't want to do. So, I mean, it's hard to understand actually how AI works in the back end. And it's often a black box. And I think that's concerning in bioprocessing because, as you said before, it's a process understanding. But if we don't understand how the technology works, we have a problem. So how can we provide transparency in the decision making, and also later on as we have to deal with, well, even early on in the development, we have to deal with regulatory agencies. How do we navigate that tension?
I don't have an answer for that. I thought about it. I thought that you need the AI tool or whatever tool you're using to explain the rationale or the justification. Like to your question earlier, how did you get two different answers to the same question? You've got to be some justification. When we make decisions, there's got to be some rationale and some justification. It can't just be, well, this machine told me the answer. But I'm not an expert enough to really address that, and especially when it comes to satisfying a regulator on something like that. I don't know enough about that.
Yeah, but I think it all comes down what you just said. It's not only relying on the technology, but finally we have to understand the process, and we have to be able to argue, for instance, with a regulatory agent and say, hey, we made this decision because of that reason.
Yeah, right. So we're not just trying to get an answer, we're trying to get an understanding. What were the logical steps to arriving at that answer?
Now, as we increasingly rely on AI, on modeling, on automation, our teams also get much more diverse. I think back in the days, it was pretty much bioprocess scientists or biologists, chemists. Now we have data scientists. We have people coming even from finance who were working with AI. We have a lot more diversity in our team. So how do we foster the collaboration between the bioprocess experts and those data scientists we need also to make sense of all the data we are generating?
Yeah, I think that's an ongoing challenge to people involved in the field right now. So this is kind of a corporate culture question to me, because what we need is a collaborative culture. So I would say, again, the leadership needs to develop this concept that we've got diverse teams and we expect them to collaborate, which means you're coming from different backgrounds. And that's why it's really important for us that you listen to each other. You don't have to all have the same knowledge, or you don't have to teach each other that much, but you do need to learn how to work together, combining strengths in a fashion that gets us the kind of results we want. So that has to do more with how people respect each other, listen to each other, and help each other achieve a common goal. So that's about as deep as I can go on that question because it is important. I think it's more of a cultural question than it is, I guess, how to structure a department or anything like that. It's more just learning to work together and learning to leverage each other's strengths.
Yeah, absolutely. Learning to leverage each other's strength. I like that. That's important. And it's about understanding how the other person thinks. Because several years ago, I was involved in a project where we were working with data scientists who had no or pretty much zero bioprocessing background. So it took us a while to understand each other. But once we reached that point where we understood and also knew actually what are the right questions we need to ask or what is the framework we have to define upfront so the other person kind of works efficiently. We were very efficient in it. But it took us a while, a couple of months to get there.
I'm sure. And it's sometimes difficult because you're thinking like, well, you should just go read that in a book. Don't ask me. Don't waste my time, right? But you have to be patient. You have to listen.
And there's like, why are you asking such a stupid question? I mean, it's logic, but actually, no.
Yeah.
If you come from a different background, it's not so logical. Yeah, we tend to forget that we work in a siloed environment as bioprocessing experts, and a lot of people outside of that bubble don't understand us.
Yeah. I have to teach myself to be more humble sometimes. I would have the same reaction. It's like, well, you're working at a biopharmaceutical company. Why are you asking me about? But yeah, you have to be patient.
Absolutely, you have to be patient. Now, as many biotech leaders are weighing significant investments in AI infrastructure, I think it's much easier to do that in a bigger company where you have a lot of resources. What practical advice would you give smaller companies, startup companies, small companies, mid-sized companies to strategically implement these technologies?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I don't know of any discounted AI software or anything like that. No, I think it's probably going to be about how can you outsource things to, for example, your suppliers. I think your suppliers are often willing to go an extra mile to win your business. Yeah, I think just looking for external resources, you don't have to hire all the experts to work on your payroll. You might want to use consultants, you might want to use suppliers. But I don't have any magic answer to that question either, David. But I think you do have a challenge when you're in a smaller company and you're limited on how you can pay for what you need. Looking outside, there's usually somebody hungry for that role, and you might hire them on a consulting basis, or you might find a supplier who really wants to win your business.
Yeah, a question I love to ask as an entrepreneur myself. As leading a small company, you always have these struggles. You have limited resources, limited time. So what do you do and what are you not doing? What I love asking myself is actually, who can do that for me instead of asking, how can I do it?
Yes.
And oftentimes that's a very good way to still tap into the tremendous potential, but rather than doing everything by yourself, actually rely on other partners, as you said, suppliers or consultants or other experts in the field. And yeah, I think that's a very good approach for especially startup companies.
Absolutely. Or just ask a lot of questions. People probably already have a network and just start asking them specific questions and who to talk to, how to solve this.
Now I'd like to touch upon another aspect of the media development, because I think this is especially important once you are in a commercial manufacturing setting. There's the whole supply chain. And we know that just a few years ago during the pandemic, we had tremendous issues because all the supply chains were disrupted. How do you see AI and machine learning and other technologies actually simplify this and make the whole sourcing more resilient?
Well, I'm not sure I saw any actual examples of that, but I can imagine that it would be very powerful for demand planning. And a business is always trying to minimize its inventory on hand for financial reasons. But I think if you have the right inputs, and one thing I think most companies can do is diversify the inputs. It's not just what are your salespeople telling you is the forecast. You should be thinking about global supply factors, and you should be thinking about historical data. I think is very important for demand planning. But I think if you have enough diversity of inputs and you have the right in silico tools, I think you can definitely improve on the demand planning that will get you through a tough time like the pandemic. I heard about this is not a case study, but I did hear about companies building up their inventory because they anticipated some of this. And so they ended up out competing other suppliers just because they were smarter. That took probably an executive who said, I know it's going to cost us more to carry the inventory, but strategically this is important. So let's invest in a larger inventory of our raw materials.
So it's a different mindset and also some courage to make these bold decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if AI was involved in that, but I mean, I can imagine that if it was connected to sort of market trends or breaking news and things like that, that AI could help with that.
Yeah, I imagine that AI can help with that. Speaking of mindset, I would love to have your take on that, Tom, because you have been in the industry for a while. And we have seen many technology hypes throughout these decades. So what questions should biotech leaders today ask to differentiate between what's really transformative in AI machine learning and perhaps the overhyped areas of aspect of those new technologies?
Well, I think it's healthy to be skeptical when you hear something that sounds too good to be true. I mean, I think it really should be challenged. And I would challenge it with the same thing we talked about earlier, and that is case studies. I mean, I think if somebody's going to recommend or sell you something that sounds amazing, I would first want to see some case studies. I think there are case studies, and I would expect anybody who wants to convince me that they could point me to some case studies and why it's relevant to my work. Other than that, I mean, I guess that's a typical answer of a scientist is show me some data. But I think it's a legitimate way of looking at that question is you've got to have justification based on actual data.
Yeah, and I think it ties also back to what we've alluded to a bit earlier in our conversation. It's about understanding. Because we are scientists, we need to understand the process. We need to understand how everything works. Yeah, it's good to have a technology that so-called miracles, but actually, how does it work? That's an important question.
Yeah, look under the hood and see what's the logic or what's the algorithm.
Yeah, exactly. I would like to ask you perhaps a bit more personal question, because what advice would you give your 30-year younger self that's just starting a career in bioprocessing?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a challenge. I probably would do some things differently. I had no idea about this entire field when I was 30 years ago or when I was in the beginning. There was nothing out like what we have today. So I would probably study biochemical engineering. Today, I'm amazed how many bioprocessing programs there are focused on bioprocess technologies. So I might choose different subjects in school if I had the chance. But other than that, I think I would embrace every opportunity for hands-on experience. So I would really enjoy working in the lab and learning how things really happen in a bioprocess. I think there's no substitute for that experience of developing or operating bioprocesses. And I would just be grateful for those opportunities. And by the way, when I think of this question, I think the failures are where you learn the most. The failures are when you encounter difficulties, say in developing a bioprocess. You're going to learn some lessons that are going to last you through the rest of your life, right? You're going to say, okay, well, I know I'm not going to do that again, or I know that when this problem occurs, here's a way that works. I probably, looking back, wouldn't sweat the failures. I would say, oh, I'm so grateful that I had a chance to learn, because just like we've been talking about the value of knowledge, it really comes from things like that, experiencing the failure, learning about what works and what doesn't work. So those are the kinds of things I think of when I look back and think, how do I become a valuable contributor? Well, it's through those experiences, and especially the difficult ones.
Yeah, fantastic. I like that. Now, I would like to ask you a very difficult question now.
Okay.
Because we are in the middle of a lot of transformation. But looking ahead 5 years from now, how do you expect future bioprocesses will differ from what we see today? And especially with respect to the human role in development and manufacturing.
Right. So I think it's not going to be magic. I mean, it's a fairly long time frame. I do think it's going to be still somewhat similar today. I think the platforms I mentioned earlier, I think they're going to dominate even more. In other words, people will have more robust generic platforms. So I think that's going to continue as a trend. People can get their therapy into the clinic very fast because they've got a robust platform. I think more and more companies will have that. But then I think the late stage will continue to look to intensify as cost becomes more and more important, as it is already. I think people will learn to intensify their processes. I think automation and digitalization, I think that's been a trend already, but I think in 5 to 10 years, that's going to become even more popular where people are building processes and development has to be somewhat involved in that. It's not just manufacturing, but development will be developing processes that can be automated and digitalized so that we're dealing now with completely digital information and actually crosstalk between the unit operations because you've got digital data that can be used to control processes, feedback control. None of these are new concepts, but I do think they'll continue to catch on. I think as a result in manufacturing, the headcount is going to be lower in manufacturing. And so I think the remaining humans, if you want to call them that, are still part of the headcount. They're absolutely going to be needed, but it's going to be a different kind of job skill. I think these are going to be people that can deal with the digitalized, automated equipment, unit operations. So you might have more this focus on data science, I think will be valuable even in the manufacturing environment where we're managing automated processes, more reliable for that reason. But so that's kind of the flavor I expect to see in 5 to 10 years from now.
With all that we have covered today, Tom, what is the most important takeaway?
Okay, well, I guess if I really condense it, it would be embrace AI because I think we all believe it's valuable, but don't allow lazy science to creep in. Got to resist it because it'll happen. If you don't resist it, people are going to get lazy and just say, well, I've got this supercomputer and I know which buttons to push. No, that's not good enough.
Yeah, smart biotech scientists, don't become lazy. Embrace AI. What a better way to conclude. Thank you so much, Tom, for sharing your insights, your thoughts, your experience. Where can people get a hold of you?
Well, I think LinkedIn is the easiest place. I am on LinkedIn, and Tom Fletcher, I'd be happy to meet some of the audience here. I think it's an exciting thing you're doing, David, so I congratulate you on its success and look forward to maybe having some more dialogue offline with you and the audience.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you very much for being on the show today. It was a pleasure to have you back on, Tom, and I will leave all the infos in the show notes. And yes, smart biotech scientist, please tell us what you think about these new technologies, how you see bioprocessing evolving, and please do so by leaving us a review. It will mean the world to us. Thank you so much again, Tom, and we will catch you on the flip side.
All right. Thanks again.
And that concludes our insightful 2-part conversation with Tom Fletcher from Fujifilm Irvine Scientific. His decades of experience and forward-thinking approach to cell culture media development offer invaluable guidance for biotech scientists at every career stage. I'm sure you found practical takeaways to implement in your own work. Whether you're wrestling with supply chain challenges, considering AI investments, or simply trying to navigate the rapidly evolving bioprocessing landscape. Remember, if you're looking to optimize your cell culture media approach, I'm here to help. Book a free consultation to help you get started with rational media design, leveraging automation and AI. If this is of interest, book a free call with me through the link in our show notes. Thank you for tuning in to the Smart Biotech Scientist. I'm David Brühlmann, and until next time, keep innovating, stay curious, and make bioprocessing smart. All right, smart scientists. That's all for today on the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast. Thank you for tuning in and joining us on your journey to bioprocess mastery. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. By doing so, we can empower more scientists like you. For additional bioprocessing tips, visit us at smartbiotechscientist.com. Stay tuned for more inspiring biotech insights in our next episode. Until then, let's continue to smarten up biotech.